This episode of Q Point Podcast is pre-recorded, produced and sponsored by Corenna and Quirk, broker at Next Home Experience.
Different views.
I know your story.
From different cues.
Incredible job.
He's David Quirk.
You brought it up.
And she's Corenna Quirk.
Imagine.
This is
Q Point.
Joining us now in studio is the president and CEO of the Maine State Chamber of Commerce, Patrick Woodcock.
It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, we know you traveled a little bit. We do appreciate it.
How would you describe the Maine economy heading into 2026?
Well, I'll get to 2026. I will do a look back in 2025 where there was an incredible amount of pressure on our business community. Navigating a new president who has flipped the economic agenda completely on its head, navigating tariffs, navigating a government shutdown. We obviously had a lot of pressure on Canadian tourism in the tourism sector. But ultimately, when I talked to the businesses of Maine, it ended up being okay. The numbers were not a home run. There's nobody said that it was a banner year. But ultimately, the aggregate numbers of the Maine economy were fine. I am concerned about the outlook in 2026 and beyond, where right now we have an outlook that our employment growth in this year will only be 0.1%. And in 2027, 0%, 2028, 0%, 2029, 0%. No growth in employment. And that is really a function of demographics. And I think we need to recognize that if we don't get a handle on this, we are putting a ceiling on the economic potential of the state of Maine.
What economic indicators are you watching most closely right now?
On a national level, clearly interest rates. So we've been on a tightrope for the last two and a half years of really can the Federal Reserve really navigate inflationary pressures while bringing down interest rates, which is holding back a whole sector of our economy. So I've been watching that extremely carefully every month, looking at the inflationary data. It has softened a touch, and whether it will be a more accommodating environment, I think for anybody for big ticket item purchases, homes, cars, that is extremely important. So at the state level, I'm watching the state revenues very closely, which have held up. The stock market did have a strong year last year, and that's revealing itself in state revenues. The outlook there is very cautious in that we have some really rapidly growing state programs. Maine Care is the prime example. And I am concerned about whoever is the next governor, the pressure of really putting together a budget will be challenged by that reality. We are watching energy costs. Energy costs is usually the first thing on the tip of the tongue for businesses. We've made a lot of mistakes as a state in energy policy that is going to be saddling costs, unfortunately, for decades. And I do also watch what type of business starts that we're seeing. It's always a little hard to isolate what are the reasons for it, but business starts in the state. Is it really falling? Is it accelerating? And then finally, I'd say tourism data. Tourism data for length of stay, Canadian traffic, which has been something we haven't watched for a while, but in the last year, it really was disrupted with some of the bilateral relations being challenged. So those are some elements right now. And housing starts. We really need to unlock housing production in our state, start bringing down the cost of buying a home, renting a house, and really start making sure that we have Maine as an affordable opportunity for this next generation. I really think of those people in their 20s and 30s right now, all the pressure on their household bills, utility costs, groceries. Maine is a really hard proposition for somebody who's starting out to really justify when the cost of living in the Southeast and Midwest is much more attractive.
I do serve on the Maine Association of Realtors Legislative Committee, and they've asked that I share. MAR has appreciated the additional support from the Chamber on housing, as it's been a priority for them for years, and they're thrilled that the Chamber is engaging. Why is the Chamber prioritizing housing on its policy agenda right now?
I think it goes back to that point about employment. If you really are not growing a labor force, you're limiting business activity. And it really struck me when I was up in Houlton and they were talking about having the ability to add an additional shift at the LP mill up there, huge employer, and they really can't justify it on the labor supply. They were looking at trying to get women into the mill as part of their workforce. Every little pocket of Maine is being challenged by housing. It's very different markets, the Bangor market versus Portland, but they are all compounding a limitation on our economic ceiling. And I really do think that we have to think about housing as an economic issue if we are going to have a successful economy. I've also heard just from developers the challenge of getting the permits at the state level, 6 months, 9 months. At the local level, they're not just opposed, they're demonized. And I really do think we need to come together as a business community to say, this actually is our fight too. If we start saying yes to housing, you're not only looking at the new building, but you're looking at a new life in Maine. And I do think that it's another issue for people who are cynical in their 20s and 30s, feeling left behind, that they'll never be able to afford to live here in Maine. We have to recognize that there's some justification for them being angry about how the economy is working for them. So it's been a great partnership with a number of organizations, including MAR has been right there on a number of bills with us. And it's going to take a comprehensive effort, but ultimately, I think we need to start saying yes to housing at the state and local level.
Which bills is the chamber supporting in a high priority way?
As I've assessed it, I haven't been a housing expert, been working over the last year, and I have found that there are really three pillars. One, can we speed the approval process at the state level? So if you're going as a developer, you need to get a state permit if you are going to have a material effect on the environment. And ultimately, in working with the Department of Environmental Protection, they're recognizing that they're too slow. And instead of requiring a full permit application, we are going to be moving forward with a bill, it passed unanimously, that they can issue a permit by rule. So if you hit all of these specifications, you don't need to apply. This is the guideline of meeting housing development. And the hope is that that will take away 6 months of uncertainty for a project, move quickly, and time is money. In addition, we've heard a lot about the building code. There are requirements for your elevator. There are requirements for sprinkler systems, and they all add up. And that might have worked in an environment where interest rates were low. Now it's compounded. It's very hard to justify these projects. So are there some relaxations of state building code that would actually lower the costs? And then I do think there needs to be a look at what are some reasonable limitations on municipalities. What I hear from developers is they've proposed something that's completely consistent with a municipality's zoning, and they either change things after the fact or they vote it down through referendum. Ultimately, I do think the state has an opportunity to say, well, there needs to be reasonable limitations for when a developer is following the rules that they get a green light. You can do this for future projects. There has been a model in New Hampshire that they have a municipal resolution board that can quickly resolve issues. Does the developer have a right here? Because developers could go through the court system, but that's going to take a year and a hefty check to a law firm. So they're not pursuing these, even though they have a justified position under the law. Ultimately, there is resources too. I think Maine got it wrong for about 4 or 5 years of just looking at completely affordable housing. The legislature spent over $300 million in affordable housing. And if you divide that up by $500,000 a unit, you're not getting a lot of units. So we do, however, think that with unlocking the housing market, maintaining a reasonable amount of affordable housing through bonding, we can have a comprehensive effort that unlocks all the housing segments in the Maine economy. So it's a comprehensive effort. I've been spending a lot of time in the Housing Committee over the last year. Honestly, Republicans and Democrats, it's one of those things that actually unifies them. They might look at it a little bit differently, but they understand that it's a huge issue for their constituents.
You are listening to Q Point Podcast. I'm Corenna Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a conversation with President and CEO of the Maine State Chamber of Commerce, Patrick Woodcock.
You know, you're 100% right. All the candidates that we've had on this program all agree that we have a housing problem. But unfortunately, it hasn't been solved yet. It's frustrating to hear that everybody agrees, but nothing gets done.
For the first time, there was, I will give the Mills administration some credit, they did do an independent assessment of what are the state laws that are on the books in other states that we should look at adopting. In this report, it's become our housing manifesto of what we should be pushing for an agenda. And some of it is just, yes, regulations, let's get out of the way. Let's make it easier. Let's start saying yes. And ultimately, we're ranked 44th on the red tape list. That's not a great environment for housing. I would say finally that's a problem is it's a specific market segment right now that really you can justify the economics, and the scale is larger than Maine is used to. The 10, 12-story building that's small units, compact. Cities in the Southeast, the Midwest are adopting those because you can justify the economics. There aren't a lot of those projects in Maine. And it really is a question for Maine. We got to add some density to our downtowns. That will be critical for just attracting younger populations into our cities. But it's also the type of housing that actually can be built right now in this challenged interest rate environment.
So talking about energy, I just sent you a bill at CMP. That was one of our EV chargers down at our Rockland GMC dealership, where between 5 and 9, CMP calls it peak timing. And to fill up one vehicle for 80 kilowatts, it costs $722. I called CMP and asked them about this. I said, wow. And it's right, between 5 and 9 o'clock, and that's one line coming in during peak time from 5 to 9, it was $722 just to fill up one car. Now, I know legislators have come in here and they all tell me the same thing, that they're going to try to lower energy costs. But as you can see there, it hasn't been going down, which is tough on all the businesses. And I was wondering on your side, have you heard a lot of businesses saying that they're not coming here because of our energy cost?
A top issue. Maine has really made some historic mistakes on energy. This is quite an expensive fill-up for the electric charge here. There's a couple components that I think we've lost with our energy policy. First, it is fairly complicated. And just starting that the legislature probably should have the Public Utilities Commission and an energy office really execute energy policy and not the Maine legislature. I came back having worked as the energy commissioner in Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, they passed a law that said, develop a new solar program. And it has to be at the least cost and develop all the different types of solar from residential, commercial, and standalone. Come back to Maine. The legislature solar bill was about 8 pages and dictated the pricing. Now, there should be a little humility that maybe they're not in position to dictate what the compensation levels should be for any energy project. And ultimately, the solar program that passed in Maine, it isn't even whether it was a good or bad policy. It was purely a mistake. There is no other state that will replicate what Maine was doing. In terms of the subsidy level, it's about 4x the level of state support that really was necessary. And unfortunately, we're going to be saddled with these costs for generations. The other aspect with energy is we really did not replace when Maine Yankee closed, Pilgrim, Vermont Yankee. We became very dependent on natural gas in the region. And we didn't come up with a portfolio that kind of recognizes that we don't produce natural gas in this area. And if we could turn back time, the real area that we should have done is expanded our natural gas capacity to the regions of the U.S. that has that production. And we really have become an island in the United States, in North America, where we're the only region that imports natural gas from overseas. So we're paying the same prices that Japan's paying and the UK are paying for. And ultimately, what happened with the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, the volatility, the high energy prices, we were exposed to it in a way that no other region of the United States was. And there's no reason that should have happened. We should have ample gas supplies into New England. A little bit going back where I really think you had to say yes to one of three things. Either have said yes to natural gas production, said yes to the hydroelectricity line, or said yes to offshore wind. You can't say no to all of these things. And it is amazing to me that we did not get these projects online to really manage what was an Achilles heel for our energy system. And that's our exposure to imported natural gas from overseas.
Some of our dealerships, we have heat pumps, and residential people get a subsidy if they put a heat pump in. But now the electricity is so expensive, it kind of offset the discount that you're getting from the heat pump or the hot water heat pump.
Well, the other aspect of this is the transition, the effort from going from largely fossil dependent to a clean electricity grid. You cannot do that on the backs of low-income residents and our businesses. And that is what we've been doing. The first thing out of their mouths is really these energy bills. They're asking the same question. Is this right? This can't be right. I was used to having a 5-10% bill increase, and this is 40. I think we've dug ourselves a huge hole. There have been some successes with energy policy. I think heat pumps have been tailor-made for Maine, but they're going to be limited by the price of electricity. So I really do think there needs to be a complete recognition that our energy pricing has gotten out of control. This should be in general fund money, not on electric bills. Ultimately, some states have made similar mistakes to Maine and have started going to their general fund to lower the cost of electricity. I think Maine needs to think about that. Maybe even a cap on how much of your bill can actually be public policy. 10, 15%, 20%, shouldn't be 40%, shouldn't be 30%. We really have to start putting these limits on electric bills because they're killing our households on fixed income, our low income population, and our businesses. And that's a tough situation for an economy.
So speaking of business, what is your opinion on the Maine Paid Family Leave Act?
I was not in my position when it passed. I will say to start that we do need to have a supportive situation for families that are having kids. And that's challenged if both parents are working. I think we should always try to help the businesses that are offering paid leave for maternal care. Maine passed what is one of the most generous paid family medical leave programs in the country. You are eligible up to 90% of your pay to a certain level of income for 12 weeks, starting on May 1 of this year. And what people don't realize, looking at other states, most of the benefits are paid out not for parental care, but for medical care. And medical care, I think we all know from our own experience, there's a spectrum of people that really need it and people that sort of need it and people that are abusing the system. And it's very hard to police. The issue for Maine is the number of small businesses. We haven't seen this play out in a state with the number of small businesses that we have and the seasonality of our economy. So we've been doing this for generations of a lot of businesses make a lot of revenue in the summer and can kind of manage through the winter months. Well, now we're going to be in a situation where what happens if you're strained already with labor and one employee asks for leave July 4th weekend? That's when everybody needs to be working in Maine. I spoke to somebody who owns a hotel in Washington County. He said, you don't understand. When they call out right now for a day, I'm the one who's cleaning the rooms. I'm cleaning the bathrooms. And now there's this ability to have 12 weeks off. I ultimately do think that there should have been more recognition of small businesses. There is in the law that employers less than 15 employees don't pay into the fund. And that's a helpful recognition. But the issue that I see is just going to be labor management. Can you really keep the operations open when a key employee is out during this time? We've got one of the tightest labor markets in the country, and we're going to add to that pressure starting this year, May 1, right before the tourism season.
You are listening to Q Point Podcast. I'm Corenna Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a conversation with President and CEO of the Maine State Chamber of Commerce, Patrick Woodcock.
I was talking to a guy that owns a body shop, and he was telling me traditionally he hears that you could lose 20% or so. He says if he loses 2 or 3 people, it could take months before somebody's car would be fixed, especially if it was the one painter that he has to paint the cars, if they were out for 3 months or so.
You think about restaurants, the lobster industry. It really is going to be tourism that I think I'm going to be really watching this summer. And ultimately, what is the utilization of the program? So there was just an assessment based on their assumptions that the Maine paid family medical leave is solvent. And the question is, the amount that we have paid into it starting last year, will that fund be enough to start managing through the utilization? We're all paying into it right now. And there has been a state, Washington State, where it has been an absolute anchor on their state finances. They've had to bail out their fund. It's been overutilized. And the real question is how much of this will be used for the solvency of the program, but also what we really have to watch is, are businesses going to start being cautious on their hours? Are they going to start pulling back a little bit? And that obviously is in nobody's interest. If they start being a little bit more careful with adding workers, knowing that they are eligible for this leave.
I don't think state workers have to pay in.
That's interesting. State workers are eligible for the program and are not currently paying into the program. There's some negotiation with the union. We could not believe it. It went to the budget last year where for university employees, the general fund supported the payment of the university because the university had to pay it or use a private provider. And ultimately, the state revenues were used to offset the contributions of the university and college system, which made no sense to me.
Well, that would be taxpayer money, right?
Absolutely.
And the municipalities, I think, would be through the property tax.
Yeah, municipalities. Maine Municipal Association testified in opposition. I do think there could have been a better compromise. I was actually in Massachusetts when they compromised a paid family medical leave that is at a lower level of replacement wages, but they also created a stable and a certain minimum wage level, and they also reduced the sales tax as part of a compromise. And trying to manage this new program while also understanding that it is going to have an impact on our outlook for the business community. So this is going to be something to watch for in 2026. Ultimately, I don't know why we started the program that it kicks off right at the start when the weather gets nice. We should have had this kick off in the middle of January.
For listeners, what exactly does tax conformity mean and why does it matter?
Well, I think we use complicated words. Basically, it means, are we going to align the Maine tax code with the federal tax code? And it is a perennial issue. Efficiency for businesses, it is extremely helpful, both at the individual and corporate level, if they maintain that what you file on your federal returns mirrors what would be eligible on state returns. So all the states will be grappling with this in that last year, in a reconciliation bill, tight vote, major changes in federal tax code. And some of the key provisions that we're watching, listeners are aware of no tax on tips. There was a limitation on the mortgages, on the interest for loans of vehicles. There were also the immediate expensing for research and development capital investments. That has been a long-standing component of federal tax law that lapsed in 2022. The question for the Maine legislature is, will the state adopt the same provisions at the state level? And for us, we are very closely watching the research and development, expensing. Some small businesses have said this would be the difference of moving our LLC to another state. We really do need to have the conformity with the federal government. The whole cost of conformity is northwards of $300 million. So this is not insignificant money for the state. What we are hoping for is that the governor will propose in her supplemental budget some provisions of tax conformity, and ultimately it will be up to the legislature to decide which ones to accept. And there will be a lot of horse trading in the budget about what of these provisions should be retained or whether Maine should have a unilateral distinction from the federal tax code.
Obviously, if Maine doesn't pass a lot of these it's going to stop more companies coming to Maine. They'll go somewhere else where they get the tax credit.
They watch these things extremely closely. The research and development expensing, I was talking to the University of Maine president. This is a big issue for the alumni network. This is a big issue for if you want to be a research institution and produce companies, you want to know that you'll be able to take advantage of a competitive landscape with your tax policy. So that really one is table stakes for a competitive economy. We're hopeful that we'll get that bipartisan support and recognize that this is an investment into employers that will actually reinvest in the state, and that's actually a good investment in the state's budget. If you're only looking at the state budget, you want these types of companies. I am hopeful that we'll get there with tax conformity, with research and development, but this is going to be a big issue for the legislature, and they're adjourning in April, so we only have a few months for this to be resolved.
Well, like you stated in the beginning, our business economy is flatlining. So they should be looking at anything they can do to retain the business that we have now. And then it would be great if new business came into Maine.
And we do need to explain this. I think for the legislature, they're lay people. They don't understand the complexities of tax. So we have been trying to bring Maine Chamber members to the legislature to talk through why this matters, why this is not a tax credit. This is not a giveaway. This is only being able to depreciate your capital investments in research and development in the year that you invested it. And we could be an outlier and say that you have to amortize it over the lifetime of the property. I do not believe that any state will make that decision. I think all the states will follow the federal research and development, immediate expensing. And I think Maine absolutely needs to follow that lead.
Thank you for joining us for part 1 with President and CEO of the Maine State Chamber of Commerce, Patrick Woodcock. Make sure to tune in for part 2 tomorrow, Sunday, February 1st at 6:30 a.m. on VOM, The Voice of Maine. You don't want to miss it.
You've been listening to Q Point.
Follow us at qpointpodcast.com or on your favorite streaming app.
This is where you can get the news from the people who make the news.
Make sure to join us next time.
We hope you tune in.
Q Point Podcast invites guests and candidates from all parties to join the conversation. The views, information, opinions, and comments expressed during this program do not necessarily represent those of the host, Q Point Podcast, associates, affiliates, and CQRE LLC.
Thanks for being a part of the conversation. The most important voices aren't always the loudest ones. They're the voices of everyday people, raising families, running businesses, serving their towns. That's who we want to hear from. Share your ideas with us online, and let's make sure those voices are never left out. Find us on Facebook or on X or at qpointpodcast.com. We look forward to hearing from you. Catch every episode at qpointpodcast.com or wherever you stream. Tune in and tell your friends.